video is off, but I'm having a lot of connectivity issues today, and I think I need to keep it off or I will get booted. But I work with the University of Kentucky, and I am also a SciFar PDTA coach, for those of you who may know me in that role as well. But we have two groups that have come together today for this panel presentation with you, and we are all part of what's called the Access, Equity, and Belonging Committees. The AEBC is the acronym for that. And so some of us initially joined this group as a part of work we had done reaching youth who were experiencing or at high risk for homelessness. And then some of us had come to these groups as some of the work that we had done through extension with youth in poverty. But we have now joined forces and have been doing some joint projects and decided that it would be a great idea to come together today and talk with all of you about some of the work we're doing nationally through extension. So I think you're in for a real treat with a good multi-state showing and summary of some really great programs that are happening out there. And we want to start off by inviting you to interrupt us. We want to talk a little bit and provide some overviews, but we really, really want this to be an interactive session. So please interrupt. Please ask us questions. Please ask us to share ideas if something doesn't make sense that we're talking about, in order to be able to help you with generating the creative juices or the ability to replicate some of what we're doing along the way. We really want to help with some of the work that we've gotten going through the years through SciFar grants or other things to be able to help you with some of this same work with the same audiences. And so we are going to start off with Travis. Travis, you want to take it away?
Absolutely. Thanks, Carrie. So I guess brief introduction. So Travis West, I work for Ohio State University Extension. And so I am chair of the Youth Living in Poverty group. And so we're going to talk a little bit about ABC, and that might be a familiar acronym or maybe not. It's hard to tell. Some people have had lots of exposure and some people are like, that's a new one. So, but to tell you a little bit about what our champion groups do, our ultimate goal is that each champion group is sort of focused on a population of individuals, and our goal is to develop professional development training and resources for extension professionals that are working with those populations. And so for us specifically, homelessness and poverty are the two that we're focused on. But the Access, Equity, and Belonging champion groups have pulled together a lot of resources. And so if you're not familiar with diversity, equity, inclusion, extension.org link, I think Carrie has put that in the chat box. So that's a direct link to that resource that has lots of things listed there. The second link I think she'll throw in there is really getting you down to the Access, Equity, and Belonging Committee and those champion groups that I talked about. And so that digs a little deeper, but gets you right to the ability for you to click on one of those population champion groups and find out what are the resources that they have on that site specific to that group. And so when we talk about resources, a couple I would like to highlight. So each champion group has identified some potential funding sources, conferences, journals, and then program development resources within the target of those populations. So some resources there for you to look at and scan as well on that site. And so the second thing, that's kind of a brief introduction. There is a lot of information on that site, so it takes a little bit of time to kind of get through that site. But again, with those champion groups, you can select each one of those and kind of narrow down your focus of that information to the group that a population you might be specifically working with or considering working with in that context. So for me, what does that look like in Ohio? And my role in a very rural county in Southeast Ohio. And so when I talk about youth living in poverty, my interest really there is with the percentage of youth we have within our county and how do I reach them with youth development programming. And so the challenges of transportation that also might exist in urban Settings also exist in rural settings. And so in my county, we have worked closely with an after-school program to provide, for the most part, STEM-based activities that have evolved into really sort of spin clubs focused on certain topics around STEM resources. And so that's one way that we are trying to reach those youth that may be participating in an after-school program. They're already there, and we have the ability to partner with that after-school program to reach those youth that would typically not be involved in a community club setting, because it involves transportation in the evenings and on the weekends to participate in those community-based 4-H clubs. And so that a lot of times is not an option for the majority of the 8 to 18 youth within Vinton County. So that's kind of my brief synopsis. I know we have lots to talk about, but I think Melissa's up next. So I'm going to throw it to Melissa and let her talk a little bit about her programs.
Thanks, Travis. So I'm one of the co-chairs for the Access, Equity, and Belongings Subcommittee on Youth Experiencing Homelessness. And I got started with this a few years ago because there was an organization in my community that wanted to support youth experiencing homelessness. And they did a community survey with the school social workers, and they recognized that the students really needed mentoring and connections to be able to be successful after high school and to navigate college and careers. And Missouri at the time had a program, and I was like, oh, I know, this will be great. We can do this, right? And the very first time I heard of that this was a need, I knew that 4-H in Missouri, our Youth Futures College and Career Readiness program would be a good fit. But it took years for it all to come together, right? That's how it works with community development. And so after a couple of years of us hanging out together, one of their volunteers was like, hey, doesn't 4-H have a program that does college and career readiness? And I was like, yeah, what a great idea. And so, so we started off with a local grant to do support for the students. School social workers were supposed to recommend kids to the program that were homeless. And then volunteers was my original idea, would be the mentors for the youth. But it turns out that these particular youth who were experiencing homelessness had so much going on in their lives that the volunteers that I usually recruit were not going to be able to support them. And so I started looking for grants that would cover staff. We had a local grant, and because of that, I was able to be part of our Missouri statewide grant. So we had a SIFAR grant in Missouri to do Youth Futures, and I got to have a local site of that grant. So that was 2015 to 2020. And after that, we were able to sustain the program with partnerships, and COVID really threw us for a loop because Jefferson College is our local community college, and they had the same goals that we did. And so they turned out to be a really great partner for sustaining the program in terms of finding staff, like funding for our staff. And so, but then when COVID hit, that didn't work out. So then we found some other grants. And now my new plan is to maybe partner with community action, because you know, there's community action agencies all over the country and different states. And those agencies have a big variety of things that they do for the community. But I think that we're going to be able to look together for the future. So so I have excitement because we've been able to sustain our SIFAR grant. It did not look like it did when we started, but that's kind of what SIFAR is all about, is how does your program grow and change over time so that it can be sustainable, so that you can keep supporting the young people. So we started out, some of the things that we learned along the way was about what the needs of youth were and about their time. It turns out that they were not able to meet after school. They work, they take care of kids and their families. They don't have transportation. They had all kinds of things going on, but we were able to partner with a school to use part of their school day and meet with them at that time. Let's see. One of the other really important things I learned about that I'm going to drop in the chat as soon as I'm done is about the McKinney-Vento law. This is a law that says that schools have to provide certain supports for youth who are experiencing homelessness. So all of us, all over the country, is a federal law. And so every school district has to have a liaison whose job it is to communicate to the students what their rights are, and also to communicate the numbers of youth experiencing homelessness in their area. And so it's a great support for youth experiencing homelessness. One of the big things is that, youth who are homeless move a lot. They finally find a place with their family, and then they end up moving in with the relative, and then they might move in with a different relative, and then they might have another place with their own family. And so the thing about the McKinney-Vento Act is it requires that the school of origin, so the school that they were last resident in that district, allow them to keep going to that same school so that they don't have to switch school districts every time they move. And a lot of students don't want to tell their school district if they live outside of the district, so then they might miss school because they can't get transportation. But if they do identify to the school district and they're protected under this McKinney-Vento Act, then the school district actually has to provide transportation. So I think that's a good thing for all of us who work with youth who might be in this, and families who might be in this area to know, because those youth have opportunities that they might not be willing to tell at school. But if we can explain to them that they could be protected or kind of mediate for them, then sometimes they might be able to have other resources. So I didn't pay attention to what time I started talking. How about I just take one more minute? So I talked a little bit about some of the needs that youth who are experiencing homelessness had, and the big differences for me was that they aren't going to be the youth or the volunteers that could serve them were not the same way, right, as community club programs. So like I mentioned, the youth had problems with transportation, kind of like what Travis said, and the other thing that they needed is they need that basic care and basic supports for life, right? So they weren't able to do their homework or think about college and careers if the electricity was out at their house or if they didn't have food. And so we did a lot of partnering with other community agencies to help them to have some of that basic supports. The other big thing that we learned a lot about was mental health. A lot of our students had issues with mental health, and we all learned a lot about it and how to refer people to services. So I look forward to your questions and more discussion. We're all keeping our sections short so that we have time for that. So I will pass it to Joanna.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. It's so wonderful to see so many participants in this virtual event. So thanks for coming. My name is Ann Jennis. I am an extension educator out of the University of Minnesota Extension. I am a member of the Youth Living in Poverty Champion Group. I'm also the co-principal investigator of a current SIFAR grant in Minnesota, which works with Somali youth, middle school Somali youth, and we have STEAM clubs. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that program. And I will just say I am held accountable and motivated by our keynote speaker today, right? Who really emphasized that we take an asset-based approach to our programs and youth development. And our young people are marginalized. And as our term, I forget how she worded it, but it was like, you hear so many stories, that young people come to our programs and they come from hardship and then we transform them. But really, our young people come just amazing, and we're able to provide these opportunities for them to thrive and flourish even more, and especially with SIFAR grants, to reduce social barriers that are no fault of their own, but a result of their environment. And I think we can take some time to talk about the SIFAR budget and even the line items that help us achieve that. So the purpose of our grant in Minnesota, we are finishing up year 2. So our first year was planning year. For those of you who are grantees, you get a planning year, which is so important. And then year 2 is implementation. So of course, our first year of full-blown implementation has been virtual, which has been successful in very creative, innovative and difficult ways. But the purpose of our grant and our project at its core is to support the educational pathways of Somali youth living in Minnesota. And we do this in partnership, in this beautiful, deep-rooted partnership with the Somali youth serving organization in Minnesota named Kajug. And we are currently implementing 2 4-H STEAM clubs. One, and that's for science, technology, education, arts, and mathematics, for Somali youth in their middle adolescent years and early high school years. One is in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, and the other is in the northeast part of Minnesota in Moorhead, which is a growing urban population with a growing Somali population, but that on its sort of urban borders is very rural white population with a really big growing community there. And so what we are doing is having young people explore STEAM topics, and we also have a parenting component. And I should reframe it, not parenting, an intergenerational family community component where we bring together the elders and the small children and siblings to come together in support of these young people's educational pursuits. They meet in a STEAM club throughout the year where they are led by community leaders with the support of 4-H staff to lead programming that in educational design. We're also leading towards a new curriculum where we're building them to be teen teachers to teach out to their families. And we're just planning in 2 weeks, they're coming onto the University of Minnesota campus. So if any of you Minnesota people are there, I know SciFar staff are there, look for young people if you happen to be on campus at the end of June. Our project really situates itself at the intersections of poverty, which is the topic of this conversation, but poverty, race, religion, and refugee identities, right? It's all comes together. And I should say Minnesota is home to the largest Somali population in North America. It's huge, and our state has been enriched with the assets the Somali community brings. And still young people, especially Somali youth, are marginalized, and there's been a real deficit approach to, addressing the barriers they face in their life. And we try really hard to take an asset-based approach and elevate, understand their cultural assets and their arts and their connection to their parents' home country and their commitment to education, while still acknowledging that Somali families have the lowest median income in the state of all cultural groups. They also, 57% of people who identify as Somali in Minnesota are below the poverty line. So we really focus on creating opportunities for young people to name their aspirations for education, or to work with their parents in partnership to work towards those aspirations, and to name those social forces that our keynote speaker identified it so well, that prevent unjustly put up barriers to their educational pathways. And I'll just briefly say, and I think we can talk about this in more detail, that a SciFar grant is what enables us to plan budgetarily to address these injustices really for the blocking young people's thriving. And so whether it's transportation or fees for opportunities, in 4-H that they may not have otherwise possessed, or just staffing community leaders that were already doing this work for free because they're so committed to their community. Now we're able to work with them as youth development professionals with money earned. So a few things. So I know I've also learned a lot through my work with SciFar about how to budget for youth living in poverty to optimize their experience in their own program and the greater 4-H program. So thanks for that. And then Carrie, if you have it, there is a little video that I would ask you to watch in your own time that gives you a glimpse of what our programs look like. So just maybe save it on your browser when it gets sent in. And thank you. And I'm hot potato to Sarah, I believe.
Yes, thank you. Welcome. Thank you so much for participating in this. And I really appreciate the opportunity and being invited to share what we were doing here in Nevada. I'm Sergio Villacek. I'm the program manager for the Youth Development Program in Reno, Nevada, which is where the land grant university is located. but I also am the administrative faculty that advises Northern Nevada 4-H youth development professionals. And a little bit about Nevada is we're largely rural, and we have 2 urban settings, one in the northern part of the state, which is Reno, and one in the southern part of the state, which is Las Vegas. And everybody knows about Las Vegas. But we were in cooperative extension at the beginning of the pandemic. NACO, which is our Nevada Association of Counties, asked extension to identify needs of youth across the state. And so extension partnered with the College of Education within UNR, as well as the Nevada Department of Education. And we developed a survey that was administered to families, school professionals, and stakeholders and decision makers in the community. And I do have links to our executive summary and different that'll drop into the chat about what we came away with. And we identified, we were talking about mental health needs of youth across the state, as well as what was happening with them. We divided it out into the results of that indicated to us that communication and collaboration was critically important to families and educators and stakeholders in any of the communities. They wanted it to be frequent and consistent, and wanted it to, more importantly, to continue beyond the pandemic. As well as what was really critically important was access to internet and technology resources. All of you have probably experienced that that's still uneven, and they needed to really were asking for an increase in access and technology and internet access, and that the digital divide still exists. It exists in our rural communities, it exists in pockets in our urban communities, and we still have a long ways to go to address that digital divide. And that it was really important for families to ensure, as well as education professionals, that the teachers had training specifically on how to deliver that technology on those multiple platforms, because everybody to learn and pivot so quickly. And I mean, all of you had to experience that, but it was really important for our parents. And that consistency, again, in terms of expectations to families wanted that consistent routine and something that when everything was, all of their educational resources were being delivered to them virtually, that they still needed to have that family routine. And it still needed to be accessible and engaging, and as well as addressing all of that across all those platforms. And that it still we had to have a clear plan at the district level that made a commitment to teachers and to our families. Then the pandemic, one of those things that we discovered is that positive changes occurred because of this, because of the way people were so able to quickly pivot and provide resources. School districts across Nevada were able to increase availability of meals to families because the school was the focal point for pickup of meals for the week for the entire family, and that efforts of the school personnel to stay in contact with kids and families was really well received. And, you know, the most important educational issues that evolved out of this study was, again, like I said, the communication, quality of that distance education, making distance education accessible for children with special needs. So we still had to address all of those needs associated with children with disability or other social and emotional needs that they needed. And that we wanted to continue to address the social and emotional needs of youth, and that providing for safety for children, that parents were really appreciative of what the districts did to maintain safety for the children and the school personnel with cleaning, distancing, and masking, and still providing that sense of calmness with a climate that was always, always, always changing. And when, if you look on the one link that's the infographic in terms of what was available to families, is that, you know, we surveyed a little over 1,200 participants, and some felt that their overall, that how was the school year doing so far, was 36% it was good or very good, 37% said it was fair, 27% said it was poor or very poor. And when we look at districts, our rural communities said our schools were doing a good or very good job. Our urban setting said it was 31%, it was good or very good. 18% of our rural communities said it was poor or very poor, but in our urban setting, it was 33%. And in terms of the ethnic and racial differences, somewhat or extremely satisfied, our multi-ethnic families were satisfied, and 55% of our Asian and Pacific Islanders were satisfied. And in terms of overall, people were satisfied, but we still had 37% that were extremely dissatisfied. Those are, you know, those are areas that we know we need to focus on, and we're continuing to do this work, and we're moving into other campuses on college to see how we can continue to pivot and provide meaningful resources for families and students. And this was we did this survey, we put this out in just a matter of weeks, and the responses came back within a matter of days. And then analyzing this data was it was a very intense, short-lived project. So we have seen a lot of opportunities that we're going to be able to continue on this, and being able to respond to our county commissioners that are saying that they were critically looking at what we were doing to address youth needs in our community. So there'll be time for questions afterwards. I really appreciate this opportunity, and now I'm going to pass this to Dorothy.
Thank you, Sarah. My name is Dorothy Munn. I am a supervising educator with Michigan State University Extension, and I work with staff across 14 counties from Northeast Michigan down to the mid-Michigan. Today, the presentation that I'm going to share is looking at a couple of surveys that we did in this past year as well around the pandemic, and then how did our staff apply that? Specifically to youth that may be living in poverty, and to hopefully help those youth gain employability skills or interest in employability opportunities to help them move out of poverty. So in the late summer of 2020, we had a number of staff come together and look at forming an action team to better understand student needs. And a result of that was that we compiled 2 surveys focused on pandemic-related educational needs and challenges. In October of last year, we sent out surveys to families who the previous year had indicated on 4-H enrollment forms that they homeschool. The second survey was sent across the state to all of our school districts, whether parochial, public schools, private schools across the state, and that was done in November. A little over 14% of the homeschool families that we had sent surveys to responded to the survey, and the second survey resulted in teachers and staff from 198 different school districts across 78% of our Michigan counties responding. What we learned was that internet accessibility was a tremendous issue, and that most of the adults working with children had little or no experience teaching virtually. The surveys also mentioned the need for support for early childhood programming, parents of young children as well. And we had staff members engaged with our action team who represented our early childhood team. And we were looking at ages from birth all the way up to 19 years of age with our survey. We learned that the preferred structure for educational experiences for both groups really ranked tips and virtual field trips high. They also communicated that the length of the time for presentations should be really short, much shorter than we thought, which was 30 minutes or less is what they had indicated that they preferred. Both groups also ranked an interest in the topics of STEM and environmental education high. We talked about that a bit today. During this time, a group of individuals from across Michigan State University Extension, the university itself, and the Michigan Department of Natural Resources partners decided to come together and focus on an environmental education program that they named Wild Spartans. The group focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion while using Michigan and natural resources. And they used university students and professionals with diverse backgrounds to be able to present information. There was also individuals from other states as well as tribal community partners. The result was that 75% of the presenters that we had represented diverse groups. And we were able to share that this was a priority because we know that STEM professions are growing at nearly 2 times the rate of other non-STEM jobs, according to research. And then the U.S. Department of Education has reported that only 16% of our high school seniors are interested in pursuing STEM careers. So when we look at poverty and we look at how we can prevent poverty, this is a real motivation for us to help teach young people about those job opportunities and the accessibility of them. The Wild Spartans program was offered virtually and held the first Tuesday evening of each month for 8 months. Each time, a different presenter offered a 30-minute presentation. They talked about their job, what their job typically looks like, and about how they came to that career and their career path. The remaining time that they had was structured with a question and answer period, and each session was recorded to allow participants to be able to engage when they had the time to engage. Youth were also taught about 4-H opportunities in their community. So if they weren't currently a 4-H member, this provided the opportunity for them to engage in our programs. The end result was that the Wild Spartans program had 134 families engaging across 2 countries, 7 states, and 49 Michigan counties. I'll put in the chat a website that you can go to find out more information as well as the video clips for the Wild Spartan group. We also have a 3-minute Ed Talk video, and the contact person if you're interested in learning more is Laura Chris, and I'll put her email in the chat as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. All right, I am going to talk just for a moment about a sustained SIFAR grant that we had in Kentucky, and then I'm going to kind of bring this all together for everyone to do a little bit of a discussion and Q&A time. We had a grant that focused on youth experiencing homelessness or unstable housing, young adults primarily in Kentucky. And that was how I first came to work with this whole group with the Access, Equity, and Belonging Committees. And we focused predominantly in the Louisville, Kentucky area. We realized years and years ago that we had a substantial number of homeless youth and young adults in that area, mostly coming in through the train system. And then also because of the National Safe Place Network, which if you've ever seen the little yellow sign on the sides of McDonald's or buses or different things, that National Safe Place logo actually began in the 70s in Louisville, Kentucky. And so we had spent years working with Cooperative Extension in Kentucky, trying to figure out and wrap our heads around how we could program. And it was oftentimes things that said, if only we had this, if only we had that, you know, it was funding or it was infrastructure situations that we just always thought we weren't sure how we were going to be able to reach out to this audience successfully. But it took really being able to start collaborating and building relationships with the YMCA to make that begin to happen. And then we were able to get a SIFAR grant, and we finished that grant last August. So we're sitting at a little bit more than 9 months now post-funding cycle and sustained, and still continuing to provide a pretty comprehensive life skills program in the Louisville, Kentucky area. So that was what brought me to working with Melissa and others with AEBC. And then we've been able to now get another SIFAR grant in Kentucky that's focusing on looking at what we found from our first 5 years of funding, which was specific themes, specific groups that seemed to really be focused or concentrated within the young adult homeless population, one of which was LGBTQ audiences, another one of which was Black and brown youth and young adults. A third one was children who had aged out of foster care. So once we were able to really start looking at who those audiences were and what we were seeing over and over, then we were able to now start another SciFar grant that is focusing on those audiences at a younger age with life skills programming. And our goal now for the current SciFar funding we have is that hopefully we'll be able to prevent homelessness as these children age out of foster care and so forth. So that's kind of the elevator speech, the 5-minute speech of some of what we've been doing with SciFar in Kentucky in recent years. And then my work as co-chair with Melissa for our subcommittee on youth experiencing homelessness. But what I'm hoping that you will see through each of these panelists' talks today is how we've all worked in some form or fashion to reach an audience that at some point in the past we thought we maybe wouldn't have had to reach, or work that we wouldn't have envisioned ourselves doing, and how it took finding the funding, how it took finding the collaborations and the partners out there, and some of those pieces of the puzzle coming together to really be able to start doing some of these programs. And again, some of these have been through SciFar and some haven't, and that's where I thought it would be a nice mix for each of you to hear today on some of these programs that have existed out there through Extension. So I'm going to move us forward now into a Q&A time. If there's a specific presenter you want to ask a question to, that is wonderful. Or if there's just an overall question that any of us can jump in and answer, that is fantastic as well. You can unmute a mic to talk, or you can put anything in the chat as well. And you might have noticed as each speaker has presented, I've tried to put email addresses in there as well so that you can follow up with anybody after this today too.
My name is Laura, and I work with the Community Central program out of the state of Maine. And while we don't work directly with youth experiencing homelessness in that it is the focus of our program, we do know that some of our youth do have unstable housing. And one of the concerns that we usually have is the ability for youth to be able to connect virtually, especially in the last year. And I'm wondering if, I mean, anyone who has shared what they've been doing in the past year, was there a way that you found that you could provide ways for youth to be able to remain engaged in that manner, or anything that you guys have maybe seen happening in your communities that has been able to support youth who have unstable housing being able to continue to connect with programming?
I can talk about that a little maybe. It has been really hard, right? Our young people, one of the things that's tricky for us is we connect with youth experiencing homelessness who are in school. And so for us to connect with them out of school, we have to get permission, or they have to have turned 18 or something like that. And so, so mostly we communicate with them through school. And so it's just about what the school has been able to let us do. We have a program at an alternative school, and they reduced the number of hours that they have with their students. And so they didn't have extra time to give us of their regular classroom time. So what we did instead is when they finally did come back in person, we brought them food. We left it at the door, and the teachers distributed it to the students. And with the food, we gave them information. And we did have one homeless student from the class. And usually there's a couple out of 40 every year, but all of the students have all kinds of high needs in an alternative school. But one student did reach out and like asked us for more information, and then we were able to connect him to resources. And so, so partnerships go where they are. That's the trick. What worked for you guys? Oh, and also you said you're from Maine, and one of our other teammates who couldn't come today is Leslie. Forstat, so you have to tell her hi for us if you know Leslie.
I do. I will. She is a phenomenal. If anyone else has been finding that the practice of mindfulness in the last year, we've been taking a lot that she's done with us to all of the youth that we work with. It's been fantastic.
So have you been able to connect with the youth this past year?
Yeah. Yes. So our program, Community Central, is workforce development focused, and we've been, the original setup was to go to locations and learn, not only the areas that have been identified as, going to have high need for employees in the state of Maine, but also not giving kids the experience of, these are the top 6 jobs that you can do. But, if you want to work in, like, we just had a series around the Maine food system. It's not be a farmer. It's not, these are the top 3 jobs that work within the Maine food system. It's really engaging the idea that there isn't one job description in each area. There are so many different ways that you can engage in the work that you want to do, or something that really ignites.
So you did that virtually?
So yes, and we had a lot of folks join us from different places in the community and different work that they did, and they shared their path of how they got there, because it's not a simple go to school, finish up, do what you want to do. So we have been able to, but of course we also know that, much like everybody else, the volume we were able to do was not the usual.
Was not the usual year, and it was really hard on families and youth. So.
Yeah, and I think the last session that I was in, talking about less is more, I switched my programming to be, hey, this is a session workshop. The next one is just hang out, connect if you want to, what do you need, what's going on, type of thing, because the connection and relationship was more important than, these are the skills you might use one day in the workplace. So
right. Thank you for sharing, Laura.
Thank you guys.
Other questions?
I'm going to give a 3-minute warning.
I guess this is a question for participants, but I think as a champion group, I said our charge is to develop resources or things that help you do a better job, whether that's training volunteers or yourself professionally or staff. And so I'm curious about challenges you feel like you have where there aren't opportunities to train volunteers and staff as they're reaching out to any possible specific populations. So are there needs out there that our champion groups could try to address, either from the perspective of youth living in poverty or homelessness when it comes to
And Travis, that's a great question, just in general, for a follow-up to, contact us. Let us know some of the things that you're coming up against with challenges and obstacles with some of your programs, because that's part of what we're hoping to be able to do through these champion subcommittees. And let us know what we might be able to provide in the way of resources or training or anything along the way too, because our primary charge through AEBC is professional development.
All right, well, thank you, AEBC team. Also to Karen I've been just watching her draw and write, and it's just amazing. I don't know how she keeps up with listening and drawing, but it has been fabulous to watch. I will invite you to come to our closing, just a couple minutes where we talk about what was fun today and what could we do better tomorrow. And I hope to see you there, and otherwise I will see you tomorrow. Thank you.